Hey everybody! This is Chapter 7, The Sailboat Race. When the people in Central Park learned that one of the toy sailboats was being steered by a mouse in a sailor suit, they all came running. Soon the shores of the pond were so crowded that a policeman was sent from headquarters to announce that everybody would have to stop pushing, but nobody did. People in New York like to push each other. The most excited person of all was the boy who owned the Lillian B. Wamrath. He was a fat, sulky boy of 12 named Leroy. He wore a blue serge suit and a white necktie that was stained with orange juice. "Come back here," he called to Stuart. "Come back here and get on my boat. I want you to steer my boat. I will pay you $5 a week, and you can have every Thursday afternoon off and a radio in your room." "Well, I thank you for your kind offer," replied Stuart, "but I'm happy aboard the Wasp, happier than I have been before in all my life." And with that, he spun the wheel over smartly and headed his schooner down toward the starting line, where Leroy was turning his boat around by poking it with a long stick, ready for the start of the race. And here are the pictures. So I'm looking at this one, and I think it's just someone who's running to see, because here you can kind of see the one picture goes with the other one. There's the pond, and you can see all the people, all the people that are gathered around watching. "I'll be the referee," said a man in a bright green suit. "Is the Wasp ready?" "Ready, sir," shouted Stuart, touching his hat. "Is the Lillian B. Wamrath ready?" asked the referee. "Sure, I'm ready," said Leroy. "To the north end of the pond and back again," shouted the referee. "On your mark, get set, go!" "Go!" cried all the people along the shore. "Go!" cried the owner of the Wasp. "Go!" yelled the policeman. And away went the two boats for the north end of the pond, while the seagulls wheeled and cried overhead, and the taxicabs tooted and honked from 72nd Street, and the west wind, which had come halfway across America just to get to Central Park, sang and whistled in the rigging and blew spray across the decks, stinging Stuart's cheeks with tiny fragments of flying peanut shells that were tossed up from the foamy deep. "This is the life for me," Stuart murmured to himself. "What a ship! What a day! What a race!" Before the two boats had gone very many feet, however, an accident happened on shore. The people were pushing each other harder and harder in their eagerness to see the sport, and although they didn't really mean to, they pushed the policeman so hard that they pushed him right off the concrete wall and into the pond. He hit the water in a sitting position and got wet clear up to the third button of his jacket. He was soaked. There's the picture of him falling in the water. This particular policeman was not only a big heavy man, but he had just eaten a big heavy meal, and the wave that he made went curling onward and outward, cresting and billowing and upsetting all manner of small craft and causing every owner of a boat on the pond to scream with delight and consternation. When Stuart saw the great wave approaching, he jumped for the rigging, but it was too late. Towering above the Wasp like a mountain, the wave came crashing and piling on the deck and caught Stuart up and swept him over the side and into the water, where everyone supposed he would drown. Stuart, though, had no intention of drowning. He kicked hard with his feet, and he thrashed hard with his tail, and in a minute or two he climbed back aboard the schooner, cold and wet, but quite unharmed. As he took his place at the helm, he could hear the people cheering for him and calling, "Atta mouse, Stuart, atta mouse!" He looked over, and he saw the wave had completely capsized the Lillian B. Wamrath, but that she had righted herself, and she was sailing on her course close by. And she stayed close alongside until both boats reached the north end of the pond. Here, Stuart put the Wasp about, and Leroy turned the Lillian around with his stick, and away the two boats went for the finish line. Okay, Here's the picture. You can hear Izzy barking. So there's the wave that came over the boat and took Stuart over, and then there's the picture of him climbing back aboard the boat. This race isn't over yet, thought Stuart. The first warning he had that there was trouble ahead came when he glanced into the wasp's cabin and he observed that the barometer had fallen sharply. That can only mean one thing at sea: dirty weather. Suddenly, a dark cloud swept across the sun, blotting it out and leaving the earth in a shadow. Stuart shivered in his wet clothes. He turned up his sailor's blouse close around his neck, and when he spied the wasp's owner among the crowd on shore, he waved his hat and called, "Dirty weather ahead, sir. Wind backing into the southwest. Seas confused. Glass falling." "Never mind the weather," cried the owner. "Watch out for the flotsam dead ahead." Stuart peered into the gathering storm, but he saw nothing except gray waves with white crests. The world seemed cold and ominous. Stuart glanced behind him. There came the sloop, boiling fast, rolled up by a bow wave and gaining steadily. "Look out, Stuart! Look where you're going!" All right, so look at this picture. You can see the dark clouds, and then there's Stuart's boat, and there was something floating in the water that he had not seen. Oh my goodness, that doesn't sound like it's going to be good for Stuart. Stuart strained his eyes, and suddenly, dead ahead, right in the path of the wasp, he saw an enormous paper bag looming on the surface of the pond. The bag was empty, and riding high, its open end gaping wide like the mouth of a cave. Stuart spun the wheel, but it was too late. The wasp drove her bow straight into the bag with a fearful whoosh, and the schooner slowed down and came up into the wind with all of its sails flapping. Just at this moment, Stuart heard a splintering crash. He saw the bow of the Lilian plow through his rigging, and he felt the whole ship tremble from stem to stern with the force of the collision. "A collision!" shouted the crowd on shore. In a jiffy, the two boats were in a terrible tangle. Little boys on shore screamed and danced up and down. Meanwhile, the paper bag sprang a leak and began to fill up. The wasp couldn't move because of the bag, and the Lillian B. Wamrath couldn't move because her nose was stuck in the wasp's rigging. Waving his arms, Stuart ran forward and fired off his gun. And then he heard above the other voices on shore the voice of the owner of the wasp yelling directions and telling him what to do. "Stuart! Stuart! Down jib! Down staysail!" Stuart jumped for the halyards, and the jib and the fore staysail came rippling down. "Cut away the paper bags!" roared the owner. My goodness, he is in a big mess. He's got a paper bag all over him, and then he's got another boat that's stuck in his side. Whew. Stuart whipped out the pocket knife and slashed away bravely at the soggy bag until he had the deck cleared. "Now, back up your foresail and give her full!" screamed the owner of the Wasp. Stuart grabbed the foresail boom and pulled with all his might. Slowly, the schooner paid off and began to gather headway. As she heeled over to the breeze, she rolled her rail right out from under the Lillian's nose, shook herself free, and stood away to the southward. A loud cheer went up from the bank. Stuart sprang to the wheel and answered it. Then he looked back, and to his great joy, he perceived that the Lillian had gone off in a wild direction and was now yawning all over the pond. Straight and true sailed the Wasp, with Stuart at the helm. After she had crossed the finish line, Stuart brought her alongside the wall and was taken ashore and highly praised for his fine seamanship and daring. The owner was delighted and said that it was the happiest day of his life. He introduced himself to Stuart and said that in his private life he was Dr. Paul Carey, a surgeon dentist. He said model boats were his hobby and that he would be delighted to have Stuart take command of the vessel at any time. Everybody shook hands with Stuart. Everybody except the policeman, who was still too wet and too mad to shake hands with a mouse. And there's everybody shaking his hand. When Stuart got home that night, his brother George asked him where he had been all day. "Oh, just knocking around town," replied Stuart. Look at this poor policeman, how wet he was. Phew. Wonder why why Stuart didn't tell George what he had really been doing, because that was kind of amazing that he won that boat race, but he chose not to tell. All right, chapter 8 tomorrow is called Margalo. Wonder who in the world is Margalo? We'll find out tomorrow. Have a good evening.